I often get asked about relations, and we're going to take a look at some of the more common. We'll open up a part. And one of the things that we can do, I don't recommend that you do it. Let's see, under Tools and Sketch Settings, there is Automatic Relations. If that is not checked, then it will SolidWorks will not infer any relations. So if I uncheck that, there is also a button under the options, and that was display, nope, relations, sketches, and automatic relations is now unchecked there. So if that's unchecked, you're going to have a significantly harder time creating the sketches and getting those relations. But for purposes of this example, this exercise, I'm going to turn those off. So I'm going to open up a sketch on the front plane, and let's start with points. We don't use points a lot, but we can do a couple of explanations with the points. So from geometry, any straight connection in between the 2 points is going to be a line, and the points are able to orbit each other. So one of the reasons that I don't typically dimension between points is that we can set a distance. So whatever we get there, oops, there we go. Go back to the select, and it will stay the distance together, but then they are able to orbit. And so now I have a binary star or something going on there. Alright, so I'm going to take the dimension off. That was one of the examples. So if I make the points coincident, and I'm kind of ignoring the origin right now for as we go through the steps. So if I make coincident, the one's going to disappear. We're going to have 2 points occupying the same location. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that. If I go horizontal, then whichever one was selected will go horizontal. And if I also tried to make them vertical, they're back to being coincident. Alright, so Control Z, and we can now, as those move, they will stretch and shrink, and we will see the blue for alignment, that those are going to stay in position, and then the distance between the two. Alright, so let's go ahead and draw a line, and we'll do one vertical and one horizontal. Alright, so as didn't pay attention to it on the first one, but on the vertical, I can see the vertical symbol in kind of a white background, but I don't get a relation. I don't get a vertical relation because it didn't go yellow, because my automatic relations aren't on. Alright, so that means that this is able to spin, this is able to move and spin, and now if I want horizontal and vertical, I have to go assign those manually. So as I pick and select, then I'm going to see that the endpoints are able to move, but my my rotation is now not active. So in our hierarchy of things, if I go point to point, those are going to be horizontal, vertical. Same with an endpoint of a line. So if I take the point and the endpoint and make it horizontal, that will cause them to move together. If I make a endpoint and the line, then I will see coincidence. Notice I don't have the horizontal vertical because the point and the line have slightly different geometries now. We're going to go to coincident, and then of course midpoint would put it at the midpoint of the line, either moving the line up or moving the points down. So if I go coincident, that's going to shift it over. Kind of shifts everything together, keeping the same spacing, but that's not really a given. If I have dimensions or I have other geometry, that's going to tie it in a little bit better. And then one more line. And so if I draw it a little bit off, I can see that it jumps back to horizontal. And then in this case, if I go line to line, then I will be able to make those collinear. So in this case, horizontal, because this one is already horizontal, and this one is already horizontal, those are just going to apply horizontal relations if they're not already there, or vertical if they're not already there. So in this case, I would go collinear, and this has the same net effect of point to point being horizontal, point to line being coincident, and line to line being collinear. Alright, so our most common very first relation that we apply is to attach something to the origin. And so if I drag one of my endpoints, I'm going to see that coincident, but again, my automatic relations are turned off, so that's going to be in white. And this kind of has the same effect. Maybe I missed it by a little bit. So if I drag away and then hold down the control button and pick the origin, make sure that not everything's, I think I had extra something selected, then I can make those coincident. And then notice that the lines are going to black, but the endpoint is still in blue, meaning that I can drag it. It's able to move and shift positions, but it won't move up and down because it's horizontal. Relation is controlling orientation, and the endpoint is controlling position. Alright, so that gives us our overall locations for the geometry. If I bring this back, and because of those relations, that point is pretty much going to disappear, and now I have extra geometries. One of the things that we can do with arcs, then our most common is going to be the 3-point arc. So I pick a center. Oh, I said 3-point arc. Probably the center point arc. So we pick, and then we drag whichever direction. And if it comes around and it connects at the end, then it becomes a circle. Alright, so at this point, if I grab the end point and drag it to the end, I can kind of see that that has that hard transition. Also, since I did not make those coincident, it inferred a merge still. I did not know it would do that. So with the automatic relations, I did not expect that to be. So I picked up the coincident, and we see the dots. Alright, so I can tell that this isn't going to be tangent, but tangent is a smooth transition into the curve. So when we go tangent, now when I drag this, everything kind of moves in that fashion. So I'm going to try that again with this one, and jump back around trying to make it a circle. So in that case, I'm going to do the control select and merge the points. Merged is one of those interesting items. And 0 length line. Well, it's trying to get rid of my line then. And I don't think the center point inferred anything, because we don't have a relation over here. So it's still trying to snap into a circle. Interesting. So, well, that makes sense. With the tangency coming off at a 90-degree arc, that point will be vertical unless I can shift it. So let's go ahead and remove a relation. So if I decide I don't want that, then I can highlight the green box and press delete on the keyboard. Or I'm going to undo real quick. or I can come over to the property manager and highlight the tangent in the list and delete it there. Alright, so my combinations of relations, I wasn't thinking through that process. Now if I drag that, it still managed to merge those endpoints without the automatic relations. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought that one through. Okay, so if I try to make it tangent again, the error was this line is shrinking to 0. A line can't have a length of 0. It could be very, very small, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, but it still has to have some dimension related to it. So if I were to make it very small and apply a dimension to it, I would see a dimension of 0, but I would have to go out however many decimal places to be able to pick it up. Alright, so for circles, if I just draw a circle out here, and we go to select, if I go point to point, then those will merge. Kind of expected that to be a coincident. If I merge the points, and that has the same effect. Let's draw one more. As if I pick the perimeter, the circumference of the circle, and the circumference of a circle, and make those concentric. And so basically concentric, sharing the same center, and they're still free to change diameters because I have not applied the dimensions or told them how big they are. So we'll do a few tangencies and then we'll take a look at dimensions. Alright, so one more circle. If I pick this, the circumference and the circumference of the circle, we would not want to make these co-radial. We'll do an example of co-radial. If I make it tangent, that's going to pull it up to where one point on the circle and one point on the other arc are going to touch, but only at one point. So if I come over and do a circle and a line and go tangent, that's going to rotate it into position, and because I don't have the dimensions, it's still going to move to try to satisfy those the conditions of that geometry, and then grow or shrink depending on what we need it to do. Same with an arc, and with the we did a center point, so let's just mention the tangent arc. Tangent arc needs an endpoint, so I could come off of an existing arc, but most of the time it's going to be off of the endpoint of a line. So when I drag that through, then I can bring it over into different positions. If I don't like the direction, I go back to the start point, drag a different way, and I can get the other solutions to the tangency. Alright, and if I stay in tangency, then I'll just be pulling off the next segment of the arc. The tangent arc also has the continuous arc, so if I start with a line and I go to the next line segment and drag back to the point, then it will switch to a continuous arc. And then it will go back to line, and if I go back to the point, the end point of the line or the end point of the arc, it will go back into continuous arc mode. So we can shift through those. Now I'm doing the click or the click drag. And there is a click, and it is just a matter of habit. We're going to have the same types of process. I think I'm faster. I think it's faster to do the click drag, at least as far as my preference. So we'll go ahead and uncheck and turn off the line, and then let's talk about dimensions for a few minutes, and then we'll draw an example. Okay, so under the dimensions, well, let's look at parameters. Okay, so when I select on a line, you'll get parameters over here, but those really don't define our geometry. If I change it, it changes it, but I can still grab that endpoint, drag it to position, and have it build up. Oh, and that's maybe another quick note, since these were showing as tangent, everything in here, but as I select, because my automatic relations, I forgot already, they're turned off, they show as tangent, but they do not have the green boxes showing up, so they did not actually achieve tangency. So I think I'm going to have to go turn that back on pretty quick, because that's going to mess me up. Alright, so if I apply the tangencies, which normally would have been automatically inferred, then I'm going to see the green boxes. So it's one thing to be careful of, is if you don't see those popping up, then that would be one thing to check. The other place is that under the down arrow next to the, see, what is that thing? Hide all types. Be careful with the hide all types, because if you click on the box, it will hide everything underneath it. And we just want to view the sketch relations. Alright, so when you first start off and load SOLIDWORKS, your view sketch relations are going to be turned on, and eventually all the little boxes will kind of take over. So at some point we'll want to come down and turn those off, and then just the items that I select, so I can see the tangency, but there isn't any dimension, there isn't any other horizontal vertical relations in the geometry. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn that back on. I'll come up to the options, go back over to the sketch and the relationship snaps, turn the automatic relations on, and we'll take a different, another sketch. So now I see the yellow box, and if I drag that line off and then back to the endpoint, that puts me into continuous. And if I right click and select, then when I select, I'm going to see that tangency. So I was expecting it over here and I didn't get it because of the automatic relations, and now that the automatic relations are back on, we are inferring those geometries. So the other thing would be the inference lines. So as I drag around, I'm going to pick up other pieces of geometry. So when I snap to, that's going to show concentric as a relation, but pretty much it's going to merge. I don't believe we end up with a coincident relation there. So that's a little bit confusing, that when we merge those points and it shows concentric, it's not really doing anything, and merges the one relation that does not produce anything in the list. There is no merge listed over here. They just connect, and they're sharing that point. They're merged. So if I wanted to change that, I would either have to delete the entity and redraw it, or I could possibly split the entity, or I could trim the entity depending on the geometry. So again, 2 or 3 ways to do the process, and let the relations come back to us. All right, so I picked on the line. We changed the dimension to, let's go to 5, but that still is able to move, and we get different results, interesting results as we drag that around. All right, so it's trying to solve for the geometry, so we're going to see things invert and flip-flop until I go to place the dimension, which we can come over and just do smart dimension. And once I place the smart dimension, I thought I hit 5, but 8's good. Until I place the dimension, I'm not going to see all 3 of those entities, or all 3 of those components of the line entity go to black. So coincident to the origin, and the line, and the endpoint of the line. And then the arc doesn't have a radius, and it doesn't have a transition or a location for the other endpoint. So that's going to stay in blue. Alright, so applying dimensions. Oh, one thing about overdefining conditions. If I have a combination of relations and dimensions that override each other or are in conflict, that's where we'll go to over-defining condition. So one of the most common is I apply a second dimension somewhere, but it already has a horizontal, it already has a vertical dimension. So when I apply the second dimension, it says, do you want to make this dimension driven? Do you want to leave this dimension driving? And most of the time I'll just cancel it. I want to figure out what's going on and come to a better solution. If I just needed that dimension for reference, then I could make this dimension driven and it will show up in lighter gray. And so the extension lines where the driving dimension is going to be in that darker shade, then the driven dimension is going to be in the lighter. And if I try to click on it, it says nope, it's a driven dimension. Go find the one that's actually driving our geometry. Throw in the note on. Let's go ahead and get those out of there. I'll delete both of those. My autosave just came up and says it's been 20 minutes. It's about right. So in the dimensions, if I come over and I do sketch numeric input, then that activates the box. And then we go to smart dimension. And let's see, which one is this going to place? Oh, I'm not drawing geometry. That would be why. So if you want to add the dimensions as you draw the geometry, so in the case of the rectangle, I'm left-clicking and holding down. So the first dimension will be 2 inches, and then 4 inches. And I think the other one, did I hit tab or did I hit enter? Let's see if it applied either one of those. So 4 inches there, and accept. No, 2 inches there. Alright, so let's try that again. So 2 inches enter, and 4 inches enter. But notice it does not leave the dimensions. It sets it to the side, so it's very much like the parameters in that case, where we're going to see values somewhere. It gives me the position. Oh, I've got the whole rectangle selected. I was looking for one of our line parameters. So 2 inches at 90 degrees, vertical dimension because of the definition of our rectangle, but I did not get an actual dimension. So I'm going to Control Z out of that. Let's go back and I'll just apply a dimension somewhere. I really don't, maybe don't need it. Let's see if I'm in Smart Dimension, and as I'm getting ready to apply the Smart Dimension, then there should be one more. And where did that go? So this is the one that always throws me. As I apply the dimension, there is one more box that I need to check that that will place it. Oh, and I'm placing it on existing geometry, not something that I'm drawing. Alright, so let's try this again. I'm going to draw the line. This was a click, and if I right click before I apply the dimension, we have sketch dimension driven. So that was our smart dimension, sketch dimension driven. Not sure why you'd want to force it to be driven, but okay. And then when I come over and say add dimension and place it, I have the yellow boxes for, not sure what it's being coincident to, but it's horizontal and I want it 6 inches long, and then I'll get the dimension. Alright, and then since this is in click, then I can go 1 inch 500 and enter, and it's going to continue to draw lines until I right click and select. I end the chain with a double click, or I switch to arc with the A key. Alright, so let's run through that one more time if I wanted to. We also have to do the same thing for the arc. So if I go into the smart dimension, and as I'm applying the dimension, I right click, and it was supposed to go in. So let's right click. I have the smart dimension, I have the sketch numeric pad, I'm not drawing again. I'm still applying it to something that's already existing. So let's see how many more times I make that mistake. Alright, so when I let go, sketch numeric input, and then add dimension. Let's draw one more and see the difference. So if I go and apply this time, 3 inches, I think I needed to hit enter before I let go of the mouse button. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I don't use this, because I'm doing the click drag. It works better with the click click, or not. Alright, so let's try one where I actually put in a dimension, hit enter, and I get the value. Alright, so like anything, it takes a little bit of getting used to. If it's one of those that you are already accustomed to, then you'll be able to pick it up a lot faster than I do. Main thing is knowing where to create those settings, or to be able to pick those settings. But it is a 2-step process that, as you are stepping through it, make sure to right click and tell it to add dimension, and then the first step was the input dimension, second step was to tell it to add dimension. Alright, I think I'm going to call that one good for now, and that will give you the kind of the basics of the relations, and maybe some alternatives to working with the relations and the dimensions. Because ultimately, when we look at the display delete relations, horizontal, verticals, tangencies, notice that all of our diameters, all of our distances, fall under that same category as a relation.